You remember your first day of school, maybe your fifth birthday. You might even remember a specific afternoon when you were 3, a smell, a color, a feeling you can't quite explain. But you cannot remember being born. You cannot remember learning to breathe for the first time. You cannot remember the moment you opened your eyes and the world existed. You were there. Your body was working. Your brain was firing. And yet nothing. Not a single frame. Most people assume the answer is obvious. You were just a baby. Babies don't remember things. But that's not actually an answer. That's a placeholder for a question nobody really wanted to sit with. Because the real answer, the biological, psychological, evolutionary reason, reaches into what consciousness actually is, when you actually began, and why the most important experience of your entire life is completely inaccessible to you. Let's start with what memory actually is, because most people have it wrong. Memory isn't a recording. It's not a camera that saves footage and plays it back. Memory is a reconstruction, a story your brain builds from scattered pieces every single time you remember something. And to build that story, your brain needs specific hardware. The most critical piece is the hippocampus, a small seahorse-shaped structure buried deep in your brain. The hippocampus is the brain's indexing system. It takes raw experience, what you saw, heard, felt, and converts it into a long-term episodic memory. A memory with a story, a memory with a self at the center of it. When the hippocampus is damaged in adults, something devastating happens. They stop being able to form new memories. They can talk to you. They can feel emotions. They can learn motor skills. But they cannot tell you what they had for breakfast. They live in a permanent, amnesiac present. Now here's the thing. When you were born, your hippocampus was barely functional. It wasn't absent. It was developing. But the neural connections required to take an experience and convert it into a lasting autobiographical memory, they weren't there yet. The hardware existed in draft form. The software hadn't been written. A 2025 study out of Yale University showed something fascinating. Infants can encode images. They show recognition responses when shown a picture they saw earlier. So the brain is registering information. Something is happening. But registering and remembering are completely different things. Think of it like this. Imagine you're taking notes at a lecture, but instead of writing in a notebook, you're writing in sand. Every wave that comes in wipes the board clean. The information was there, you processed it. But an hour later, it's gone. That was your infant brain. But here's where it gets genuinely strange. Because researchers recently discovered that the hippocampus isn't the only reason. There's something else happening, something that doesn't just fail to store memories. It actively destroys them, and it's happening in your brain right now, in every infant's brain right now, and scientists only started to understand it in the last few decades. The phenomenon is called neurogenesis, and it's one of the most remarkable and overlooked facts in neuroscience. During the first years of life, your brain is doing something no adult brain does at the same scale. It's growing new neurons at an extraordinary rate, especially in the hippocampus. Hundreds of thousands of new cells flooding in, forming new connections, restructuring the architecture of memory itself. This sounds like it should help memory. More cells, more storage, right? Wrong. When new neurons flood into an existing network, they don't just add capacity, they destabilize what was already there. Old connections get disrupted. Earlier traces get overwritten. The very act of growing a more powerful brain erases the recordings of the brain it used to be. It's like upgrading your phone's operating system and losing everything saved under the old version. The new system is better, but the old files are gone. Researchers at the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto confirmed this in animal studies. When they artificially slowed neurogenesis in infant mice, the mice showed better retention of early memories. When they accelerated neurogenesis in adult mice, those adults started forgetting things they had learned. The science is counterintuitive but clear. Your brain had to choose between growing up and remembering. It chose growing up. But there's a third layer, and this is the one that changes how you understand yourself. Memory doesn't just require a functioning hippocampus. It requires language, not just the ability to speak, but the conceptual architecture that language builds inside your mind. Autobiographical memory, the kind where you remember you were there, is a narrative. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It has a protagonist. It has you. And to construct that narrative, you need the tools of language. You need categories. Mother, pain, morning, before. You need syntax. This happened, and then that happened. You need a stable concept of self, the idea that there is a persistent me who experiences things across time. Infants don't have any of that. They have sensation. They have emotion. They have raw, immediate experience, but they have no way to organize it into a story, no way to anchor it to a self. The experience floods through them, overwhelming and complete, and then it washes away because there was no narrative structure to hold it. Developmental psychologists call this the narrative self, the version of you that can say, I did this and I felt that. Research consistently shows that this self begins to form around age 2, coinciding almost exactly with language acquisition. And it's no coincidence. Language didn't just give you the ability to talk, it gave you the ability to remember. And because it arrived when you were 2, everything before that threshold exists in a kind of permanent darkness. Here's the part nobody talks about. The birth experience, the most physically extreme thing your body ever went through, wasn't lost because your brain was weak. It was lost because of time. Because the neurological machinery required to record it didn't exist yet. because you had not yet become the you that remembers. That's a genuinely unsettling idea. The you that reads these words. The you with opinions and memories and a sense of continuous identity that you didn't exist at birth. It emerged slowly, over years, constructed piece by piece through language, relationship, and narrative. The infant in the delivery room wasn't you yet. It was the biological precursor to you. This isn't philosophy, it's neuroscience. The concept is called autobiographical continuity, the thread of narrative identity that connects your past self to your present self. Cut that thread, and there's no memory. And for your first 2 years of life, that thread hadn't been spun yet. There's something Locke wrote in 1689 that feels uncomfortably relevant here. He argued that personal identity is defined by memory. If you cannot remember it, it wasn't you. By that logic, you literally were not there at your own birth. Most scientists today reject that strong a claim. But the discomfort it creates is real and it points at something true. But here's the thing that changes everything. Just because you can't consciously remember your first years of life doesn't mean they left no mark. There's another structure in the brain that matures much earlier than the hippocampus, the amygdala. The amygdala doesn't store narratives, it stores emotional imprints, raw patterns of fear, comfort, threat, safety. It doesn't need language, it doesn't need a narrative self, it just records, this felt dangerous, this felt safe, this person felt like warmth, this sound felt like catastrophe. Researchers have found that the amygdala is functional from birth, possibly even before it. Which means that while your hippocampus was erasing everything, your amygdala was quietly filing away the emotional texture of your first experiences. You can't tell the story of being born, but your nervous system lived it. The comfort or anxiety you feel when you're held. The way certain tones of voice make you feel safe or tense before you can explain why. The inexplicable feeling of peace in certain environments or unease in others. These aren't random. Many of them trace back to experiences so early they predate your ability to remember, experiences that shaped your emotional landscape before you had words to name them. Your body remembers your birth, it just can't narrate it. And maybe that's the most human thing of all. For your entire existence, you've been a person who carries something they cannot see. A foundation laid before you were conscious of being built upon. A history that precedes your memory of history. Every anxiety that feels irrational. Every comfort that feels inexplicably deep. Every fear you can't trace to a source. Some of it was written before you had a story, before you had a language, before you had a self. You were shaped by an experience you will never remember. And the fact that you can't remember it doesn't mean it didn't make you who you are. We didn't just forget being born. We grew out of it. We became something new, something complex enough to ask the question. And most of us never stop to realize what that means.